Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining the second session of our training series, Managing Technology Change Projects for Business People. My name is Alan Reed, and I'm a director of Get Savvy. I'm really pleased to be tackling the vital topics today of how to get your requirements agreed and how to navigate the minefield of the marketplace to pick your optimum supplier without a load of arguments later, disputes, or people saying, I thought you were doing that. No, I thought you were doing that. Let's get the process right so none of that happens. Today, I'm delighted to have with me someone with immense experience in delivering many projects on the ground. That's Matt Dunphy from Wharton Business Consulting. Matt, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, welcome everyone, and indeed welcome back to anyone who joined us last week. My name's Matt. I'm currently working actually in HR consulting with a company called Wharton Business Consulting. Certainly a long-standing collaboration with Alan and partnership with Get Savvy, and I'm equally excited to get into the content today.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, well, without further ado, just a brief word before we get fully into the content. So the session's being recorded and we'll send everything to you. So please don't spend all of your time writing mad notes and just engage with the content. Please do use the Q&A box for any questions or any technical issues. We've got my colleague Glenda on hand if there are any technical issues, but the Q&A box is for Matt and I to tackle problems about your project or things that you're concerned about towards the end of the session. So please do drop your questions into there as we go. And then just a reminder that the content for this session is taken from our online self-paced course, Managing Technology Change Projects for Business People. The course is 7 hours of learning in total, and somehow we managed to cram into that every phase of a technology project in your own business and what you really need to get right at every stage. That chargeable course is deliberately priced to be very inexpensive at £300, but the delegates on this training series get a 50% discount voucher. So if you're involved in a project in any way, do yourself a favor, make sure you get that approved. Final thing I'll say is that there's so much content that we have to get through that there are some detailed slides from the course in the training session today. We won't have time to cover them, but we wanted to put them in anyway so that we can send them to you and you have that to help you on your next project. Okay, so let's get going. So first of all, a little bit about us at Get Savvy. We provide the learning platform to help people who are faced with a technology project in their own organization. And that's really distilling something like 30 years of experience in projects. And this, you must do this and please don't do that to make sure that you don't trip over your own feet and you have a successful outcome. We're 100% independent of any technology or supplier, which we find to be vital when it comes to advising people on their options and how they work. I'll just say briefly that we're often asked to consult or advise or help people set up their own projects. And we do that either by working with people at the beginning, helping with the strategy, or sometimes just providing a little bit of guidance all of the way through their projects. Great. So let's get into the topic. So this is all about you as a project manager in your own project. So imagine yourself in that scenario. As we said on the first session, in this scenario, your CEO or someone on your management team has pointed at you and said, we're years behind where we should be on supporting our members or engaging with our supporters. Go and sort this mess out. And you're in that terrifying position of then having to tackle this. And of course, you know it's got a project management element and you know it's got a technology element. And now you need to figure out how to get started. Well, the good news is that although all projects are different, the reality is that with a few vital techniques and documents and ways of working, you can break it down and learn how to get successful outcomes from every type of project. So what's on you to do that? Well, first of all, you need to start getting into your organizational self. And even if you are not terribly organized in your own life, there are ways of learning how to drive that through projects that people can learn and have good outcomes from learning. You need to learn how to what's required from colleagues around you. One of the most important pieces of advice we always give at Get Savvy is learn how to share the problem in the appropriate way. Don't be the Lone Ranger. Learn how to tell people what's expected out of them. A lot of it is about making sure that you're reporting and engaging regularly with your senior management team so that you're sharing the problem with them and getting what you need out of them. And then using a combination of your common sense, business sense, and problem solving skills, you can actually have everything you need to be able to have a successful project management experience with your own project. One of the key things we get asked often is, do I need to be a bossy person? Do I need to be this kind of alpha person? And categorically not. Neither Matt nor I fit that bill, but somehow we managed to get people to collaborate on projects. And there are very tried and tested ways of doing that that we cover today and in the course as well. Okay, so what we're doing today is really focusing on this part of the project journey. So stages 3 and 4. This is where you're starting to get your organization more widely involved in the project to define what they want and to be clear about their ambitions moving forward. And then you're taking that to the outside world. You're taking that to the supplier marketplace. So let's work out how to do that. So the first part of it is, and this is you starting to tackle what you need to do as a project manager. So the context here is that you've had your business case approved. You know, you've been told you're okay, you can go off and spend some money, and you can go off and initiate this project. And now you're starting to get your organization to tell you and agree with you and sign off on what they need out of this project. So the first part of that we love a checklist. We love setting your expectations in advance. For you as the project manager that is going to be tackling this, or at least in any way if you're involved in the project, these are the kind of things you need to be thinking about as you're entering this phase. Don't be someone who's dragging along behind the project. You have to be thinking ahead all of the time, of course, as a project manager. And these are the things you need to be thinking about. So recognize that your requirements document is not just some piece of administration. It's going to be the foundation of your relationship with your new supplier. So it deserves the respect of making sure it's checked, that everyone's agreed on it, and so on. Everyone's signed off. Getting everyone on board is about making sure that people understand their role in the project and that the requirements document in this particular context is their chance to say what they need and to say what their ambitions are and to have a go at getting that out of the project itself. You have to make it clear they can't just leave it up to you. Then, of course, you're turning that into a request for proposal. That's what RFP stands for. And that's going to be something that you're going to use to engage with the market. We cover off how to tackle and compare one response to another. An awful lot of writing an RFP is thinking ahead to think, all right, how am I going to make sure I can differentiate suppliers so I can compare apples and apples when they all come in? And then there's a checklist that we provide to make sure that goes well. And we have a little quiz in a minute just to make sure that everyone is awake and absorbing the content. Just a brief reminder, please do remember to drop any questions that you have or anything that's not clear into the Q&A and we'll tackle it later. So first of all, let's just tackle the two obvious points. The reason we've got this, what are requirements and what are requirements gathering? The reason that we're being Captain Obvious here when we're saying requirements are what you need from your technology in your new system, and requirements gathering is getting that from your stakeholders, is because although it's really obvious, these things often go wrong. So what we find is that people gather requirements at entirely the wrong level. So it's either far too granular and detailed, or it's all about the old system. And then on requirements gathering, you get stakeholders who think, "Oh, I'm sure you know what you're talking about. You kind of know what I do. Can you just get on with it?" And then, of course, with unhappy outcomes from both of those misunderstandings. So let's go through and see how we can make sure neither of those unfortunate things happen. So I'm just going to invite Matt, if you don't mind, Matt, to comment on getting the right level of detail and making sure your requirements go well. I'll just put everything on the screen for you.
Thank you, Alan. And yes, so we're going to cover here the right level of detail to have in your requirements document. The reality here is the risks are that there is too much or too little information in this document. So to give some examples, if you see it on screen there, you can really provide too much information. If we use the example of needing a member form or a donor form, you do not need to go down to the level of listing all of the fields required, like surname. Simply doesn't help suppliers at this point. I'd also encourage you not to add distractive information. You might be tempted to talk about the context of a certain requirement, but again, that can often get in the way for suppliers, particularly their ability to quote what it will take to build that requirement. We talk a little bit then about where you should provide more information. Please do cover all areas where you've built something quite complex in your current systems, or actually where you believe you have built something or you need something that's quite bespoke to you. And then finally, then, if you need a safety net here, visually more information than less is better. If you create a very brief, high-level requirements document, you may well have missed things. And again, it's challenging for your suppliers to quote against that. So that's covering the level of detail in requirements. I think, Alan, if we move on from there,
Right.
we're actually going to talk now about the need to prioritize the requirements in your document. Now, experienced project manager, I've done this many times. People will disagree on the level of priority across the various requirements. It's natural they would generally score things up and think they are of higher urgency than not. So what's your job as project manager? Well, you will need to be the person with your senior management team thinking on behalf of the organization as a whole. So the golden rule of thumb here is a department might think something is of high priority, you may disagree looking at the whole set of requirements on behalf of the organization. And then I think if we move on from there, let's say you've got your collated set of requirements, they're accurate, they're complete, they're prioritized. You're obviously going to need next to translate that into what Alan stated earlier, the request for proposal document or RFP. You might also hear this referred to as the invitation to tender or ITT. Essentially, it's the same document. So what's your job again as project manager? Well, you will need to build this document. You will make sure that it's accurate and complete. You will also make sure people are bought into it. So you've talked to your stakeholders that may want to add information or edit it. And then finally, then you will be responsible for distributing or publishing the RFP to your list of suppliers so that they can respond within a fixed time frame. Back to you, Alan.
Great, great. Thank you so much. That's really great advice. As part of the RFP phase and your role as project manager here, what we try and emphasize, let me just put it all on the screen. What we try and emphasize is that it is all about looking ahead. What do I need out of this phase? What must happen before we're ready to engage with the marketplace and be clear about what we want with suppliers? So it's your role as project manager is to essentially treat this lot here as a checklist of things that you need clarity on in order to say, yep, we finished that. That part is now done and we can do the next thing with it. So project goals and benefits that are required. You might think this is super obvious. I'll just pull it off the website. Here are organizational goals. You might be surprised at how often I've sat and asked that question, what are your goals from this project? And then people break out into an argument. And they have entirely different views. So that's building your project on sand, if that's the case, because you can't hope to succeed on those goals if people aren't agreed with them. The other thing, of course, roles and resources. Projects are extremely time consuming, extremely demanding, and it's always on top of the day job of multiple people within the organization. So being clear about how you're going to resource the project, who's going to do what, but that includes also things like the requirements gathering and the tendering process. They're very time consuming exercises in their own right. So you've got to be clear about that as you go. What does the process look like with suppliers? Are you going to have one presentation? Are you going to have 5 presentations? those kind of things need to be nailed down. Obviously, Matt's just been talking about the requirements and the scope. What you'll need from suppliers also needs to be nailed down in terms of how you're going to consume their time, how you're going to do your due diligence with them, what material is going to be provided. And then that last one on market research is really about, in some ways, how many suppliers you intend to include in the process, bearing in mind that each supplier is going to consume at least 2 days of your time to evaluate. How are you going to do your research to make sure that they're the best shortlist or the best list that you can start with? So checking all of that as before you complete the phase means that you're not then moving on before you're ready as part of the RFP phase. So what needs to be included in your RFP? We'll send you this, so I won't go through it in great detail, but it's enough so that people understand the context of your project, what you're trying to achieve at a high level and at a granular requirements level, and what's expected out of them as a supplier. So it's very key to nail that level. One of the things Matt kind of touched on is that what we can find with requirements gathering is that people go too low, or they spend the whole time, complaining about their current system. And one of the things we try and get across is your current system is largely irrelevant when it comes to you defining requirements for your new system, and that should be reflected in your document moving forward. Okay, so the apples and apples thing is a question we get very often. What we get actually, if I can just build the screen, we get people saying, oh, I've sent out my ITT or RFP document. They've all come back and everyone is saying they can do everything. Everyone is, they're all saying yes to everything. How do I then differentiate people? And in fact, part of that is making sure that you've written the document in such a way that you're asking them not just yes, no questions, you're asking them to say how they will do certain things. What's their experience of doing this elsewhere? What is their track record? And all of those things will then better enable you to compare apples with apples. And of course, the clearer you are about how people should specify things and respond to things, the more likely you are not to have gaps when you're looking across 3 or 4 different vendors, and some have this and some don't have that, which makes your life very difficult. Okay, so top tips around that element of the process. First of all, when it comes to requirements, don't just have the top moaners or the top complainers who have everything listed for them. It's part of your role to go and solicit requirements. Some very, very complicated areas have people who are not very outspoken or who don't complain much. That's don't forget that, or else you'll crunch into that when it comes to your replacement project. The requirements gathering process isn't just you sitting there taking notes as people recite a bunch of stuff. Part of your role is to challenge what it is. What is it you're trying to achieve in future? What could be pushed out online for people to be able to do themselves? What's realistic in your view that we could automate that, or we could change how that process works? So how often do you really do that? I know we spent the last 10 minutes talking about it, but if it only happens once a year, then actually we're not going to demand that it's part of the new project, because it might not be the best use of time and resources. And then, as Matt said, pitch it at the right level. Virtually everyone here will be selecting very mature systems that are used widely elsewhere, or at least if it's a bespoke project, it's someone who's used to doing it elsewhere. You don't have to say, I need a surname. You don't need to say, oh, I need to be able to attach attributes to a person's record. I don't need to be able to say I need more than one email address, etc. anymore. Okay, so keep the detail for your complex areas and don't just have overwhelming ordinary stuff that then covers up your actual detail. Okay, let's do a scenario. And then we are going to pop up what you would do as the project manager, what you might do in this scenario. This happens all the time. It'll happen on most projects. So stakeholders disagree about an important requirement, and they have really different views of what's required from the new system. Now, you're not the business, yourself. You're the person trying to get clarity from the business. So what should you, as a project manager, not do in this scenario? So let me just put up some options on the screen, and then these are the kind of things that you could do, but we want you to pick one is something that you should not do. So let me just put the poll. So what we've got here is that pretty much everyone has agreed it is not your job to make an executive decision. You can't just say, we'll go with that version of the requirements because that's the least irritating person, or that's the simplest or the cheapest. That's inviting you to have something that's delivered to you that then you find out, oh, that was the wrong decision. You've got to get the business to make the decision and own the decision, because in all likelihood you'll be gone at some point in the future, later on, and they'll be left with the system. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. And then we'll carry on. Well done, everybody. Everybody's pretty much got the right results on there. So moving on from there, what we've got is, all right, let's start writing the RFP. And Matt, if I could invite you in again, and I'll put it all on screen. And then if you could just highlight the points you found in the real world that the delegates must pay attention to when writing their RFP.
Of course, I'll run through this very quickly. Anyone who joined us last week for the business case training, this is somewhat similar. You can recycle information from that document and bring it forward into your RFP. So you obviously need to talk about the background of the organization and your project. You'll need to state the case for change. Simply, your potential suppliers won't know that right now. You can also include the objectives of the project, what you want to achieve overall. And then, of course, technical information like the scope of what must be delivered and your timeframes. Of course, you're going to need to lay in the set of requirements themselves, tidily prioritized. You're going to need to talk about the evaluation criteria, particularly any scoring system you're going to use to evaluate responses. And then finally, then you're going to need to offer some guidance on submission. I've been on both sides of the line here. There is always a panic at the end for suppliers of saying, exactly when do I need to submit by and how? Is it a PDF, by email? Is there a portal, for example? So that's what the RFP needs to contain. I think, Alan, if we move forward, we're going to talk a little bit about this moment when the responses begin to come in.
Right.
So crucially, just to cover that on screen. So yes, so we flash forward and the request for proposal responses are coming in. We just wanted to give you some tips on actually what to expect and probably how to identify quite early a good response from a weak one. Now, you will have laid out a tidy format in your RFP for responses because we are training you on that. If your responses come back in a very different format, quite messy, watch out. There's an indication there that suppliers have been either somewhat willful or inattentive to what you need. Now, conversely, if you get a very well-crafted professional request for proposal back, that's really going to be a sign that your supplier has spent the time they need to actually craft what you need. Also be very clear, so you might not see it on screen, but I'll keep going. There you go. About the way that suppliers have actually demonstrated what you need against your evaluation criteria. I often find it's great when suppliers have directly answered what you need in your format. And again, like the requirements document earlier, more than less information visually is probably a good indication. If you get a very slim response back, it sort of forces you to ask questions about how much time has been spent on the response and indeed the integrity of the amount quoted as the price of your project. So you don't want War and Peace, but certainly seeing a good sized document of detail is a great indication at this stage. Alan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt. That's great advice. So, and again, what we've got here is something that you could choose as a checklist. I'm just going to go through it really fast. As Matt says, one of the key differences that you're looking for on a tender response. It's not just that they've said yes to everything, because the reality, I'm sorry to say this to here, this is the first time you're hearing it, most of your vendors will say yes to everything. So how do you then start differentiating on that? So it's looking at the quality of it, as Matt has said. Have they just changed the name on someone else's that they sent in last week? on all of the content around the requirements and so on, or have they really paid attention to what you're trying to achieve? So we're going to send this to you, but please treat this as your own checklist, and look, just make sure that you're looking in detail at each of these questions. So sometimes you're looking for things that aren't there. Where's the quality? Where's the attention to detail? Where's the showing that they care and understand what we're trying to achieve? So as I say, we're sending all of this to you, but please do use it as your own checklist. Okay, so top tips from this phase. Recognize that it's a sales pitch from the supplier, and it's their job. You're not wasting anyone's time. If you are giving them a fair crack of the whip and you're considering them to be selected, then you can be demanding. You're not wasting their time. You're not, being unreasonable. So please make sure that you go back and ask for anything you're not clear about. Ask for more clarity on things, and more information and more work if you require it. You're probably in your terms considering giving them a lot of money. So be polite, be respectful, be collaborative, but be demanding is our advice. The research is really important. Research, the not-for-profit sector is fantastic at talking to each other, helping each other, collaborating with each other. So go and talk to clients of theirs already, even if you haven't been introduced. Reach out through LinkedIn or whatever. Surprisingly, often people will share, but also look at what other people have sought to achieve, who's doing it well. There are lots of networks in the NFP space where people can talk about what good looks like in 2024 going into 2025, and be realistic and reasonable with your timeframes and your workload. Most projects take a minimum of 6 months, to be perfectly honest, a substantial project, and more commonly go into a year and beyond a year. So being realistic about that, and not expecting everything to be, they have to lie to you to get the business. They don't want to be the only one telling you. It can be done in a realistic time frame. It's about being realistic yourself. Okay, so just to summarize some of that, challenging your stakeholders we find it to be very, very important. Not being a passive process, thinking about ambitions as well as what people are doing right now. Do not let them just moan about the current systems. It's utterly irrelevant and not going to help you define what you want next. A clear set of prioritized requirements. So be strict with people. If everything's top priority, then nothing's top priority. So you've got to be realistic about what you must have, particularly if your budgets are tight, and what must be delivered in the first phase and what could wait a bit longer. And then your RFP isn't just a shopping list. It's got to set out your goals for your organizations, your ambitions for the project. Okay, moving on from there. Here again is what we think of as a very handy checklist for you as part of this phase. So before you can move on, before you're getting into the next part of it, are your requirements approved by your different business areas? Has your project sponsor, normally your senior leadership team member who's leading on the project at that level, have they signed off and said, yes, we're happy, this makes sense to me, and if this is delivered, this is therefore a good project. Then of course you get to send it to your potential suppliers, and you then, as part of that, considering who your potential suppliers are. Keeping that list very tight is a big part of the advice we're going to come to shortly. And then your response evaluations, including comparison of costs and a wide list of other factors. Have this as your checklist before you're then moving on and treating it as a foundation for further work. So let's talk about the supplier selection. This is where you're going to have you're engaging with the Wild West of the supplier marketplace. Everyone thinks that they're the best supplier. How do you get the best out of that process? Well, first of all, there's another checklist for you. You in the role as the project manager. These are the things that you have to be thinking about as before you engage on this process and before you go to the wider marketplace. So first of all, thinking about your procurement process. How are you going to do it? Who's involved at your side? How are you going to be making the decisions? Who's involved in the decision making? What phases are you going to take it through? All of this has to be laid out in advance, cleared clearly and signed off by your various stakeholders. We provide another checklist to make sure you get this right, a handy tool that we'll send to you as part of the content, and then we do another quick quiz at the end. As we go through, how are you going to have a good supplier selection process and make sure that you can compare your suppliers easily? So Matt, do you mind if I just invite you to comment on this area?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of deciding, what a good supplier process looks like, you need to get a really clear understanding of the options that are being presented to you by all of your suppliers. So that's one area. Sorry, just to say the sections have disappeared off my screen, Alan.
Have they? What is,
Yeah, sorry, they're moving around a little bit for us at our end. Yeah, just say you do need to allow sufficient time to evaluate with suppliers. That's crucially important. And we can talk a little bit in detail about that. And then finally, this is really another opportunity to involve your stakeholders, to continue to gain their buy-in and crucially, to hear from those who have decision-making power. So I think we'll just move on from there. I think, Alan, back to you.
right. Good. Are you seeing this section okay on your screen, Matt?
Yes, so this is finding suppliers. Alan, do you want me to cover this one as well?
Yeah, if you could comment, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are common pitfalls here around finding suppliers. Some of this is really about identifying who's viable to you. You might have a long wish list up front. It's important to sort of include those who actually will fulfill the needs of your organization. So, we recommend a number of ways to tackle that. It is a great idea to do some research. And there are several things you can focus on there in terms of, the track record of your suppliers, crucially what their existing clients say, or indeed what they share around testimonials on their sites, things like that. And also, you may well at an early stage be able to get an indication of their general performance in the sector. Their financial health as well. And just to cover that point at the bottom, so you might have procurement needs. Please do abide by those. Whatever it is about how you like suppliers or elements of what they provide that you feel will be suitable, procurement is important. So I think if we move on from there, Alan, that's focus on finding suppliers.
Very good. Yes, Matt, and so that one of the key questions we always get is how to agree who your suppliers should be, and how to identify your long list. So just from your experience, what's the points there, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of lean in here a little bit, some of the factors on screen. So track record is important. There are ways, whether it's a network event or actually directly talking to clients, if you can find that out. How are these suppliers performing right now? Sort of what phase of their development are they in? You will see information online about the product. You can absolutely learn a lot from that. I've mentioned testimonials already, or speaking to clients and hearing their experiences. That's really important. And then if you can see any demonstration, that's great. Often, sometimes suppliers will have this on their sites. Or you can request it in a fairly no strings attached way. So you get to meet them and you get to see a little bit under the hood, as it were, of the product they provide. And finally, then I would examine the training offer. If you remember, when you deliver this system, you will have lots of your users using it on a daily basis. If a supplier offers more training support than not, that's a good indication that you might want to keep them in your long or indeed short list for the RFP. And I think we'll
Fantastic.
move on from there, Alan.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. And as Matt was saying, the goal at this stage is to identify the ones that you want to be a best fit and to rule out the rest. Matt, just a quick point. This is one of the most common questions that comes up. Who do I include in my evaluation process? And it is a real challenge if you're not familiar with the market and you don't know the suppliers in the market, as indeed, why should you be before you start? And we have the kind of people starting off with the position of surely the more suppliers I invite, the better, because I can then look at all of their stuff. And then the other reality, which is that actually, the more suppliers you invite, the harder it is to get clarity on which are the good ones and so on. My own experience is that one of the most important resources to manage as part of your supplier selection process is the energy and the time of your evaluation team, your own organization. And what I've found is that if you are inviting 10 or more organizations, this vast number of organizations to bid, your team just get exhausted before you even started. Before you get down to the last 2 or 3 that you're considering, you've already spent far too long and they've had far too many meetings and they're kind of sick of it and they're just desperate to kind of throw a dart at the list and pick one, for goodness sake. So can I just get your thoughts on that? Have you found people including too many vendors, or do you think a lot of vendors is a good idea? What's your experience?
Yeah, I think there's some technical things that help here, the scale of your project, and also how complex it is. For example, if you're looking at a website and a CRM system, it may be worth having a blend of different suppliers, some who provide all of that, some who provide the different elements, and also, a longer list. It's hard to say, 4, 6, 8, I think scale is important. And then I think whatever list you end up with, it needs to fulfill 2 things for me. It needs to be manageable for the people who you will have evaluating to evaluate in the time frame, because these processes can run late, and that's not great for everybody. And also it needs to offer you choice. It's crucial that in the final list, people are viable and you have some good options and choice in there.
Fantastic. That's really good advice. Thank you. Okay, so again, this then becomes a checklist for you. That's the word of the week here. But we do find that protecting yourself does involve having a list of things that you need to achieve and being ahead of everyone else in the exercise book, if you like, on making sure that you do them. So, what does the right kind of supplier selection process look like? Highly engaging, we find to be important. You're going to be asking your organization to deploy this system. A lot of staff have to change how they work potentially. Perhaps your members have to, and supporters will change how they engage with you, which again will affect your colleagues. So something that is going to involve your colleagues and have them buy into the project early is a really important indicator for success on the project later. Treat it as a learning opportunity. Finding out the art of the possible and what the rest of the marketplace is doing and what your other organizations in your position are doing is really important. So use it as an interesting thing. What's reasonable to demand, what's reasonable to hope for. And then that whole thing of what good looks like. The modern best practice is changing all of the time. It doesn't mean you have to change systems all of the time, but when you are changing systems, it's your opportunity to see, okay, great, we can be doing this now. Members are expecting this now. Supporters expect to be treated this way now. And so making sure that people are learning and engaged and interested is a great way of making sure that when you are demanding lots of work from people later, that they are brought in to the project. They should feel consulted. They should feel that it was partly their decision that got the system selected. Let's do another another scenario here. What we have with the supplying with the selection process here is that we have people that are involved in the process, but you can't have everyone involved in the actual decision. But what I mean by that is that you're going to have multiple meetings with multiple different suppliers. Not everyone can attend every meeting with every supplier. So you have to be realistic that if you haven't attended all of the meetings with all of the suppliers, you really can't compare them all. That's a very obvious point. So what you have to do is divide your staff who are involved in the process into people who are forced to attend. Your commitment is to attend every meeting, and therefore you can be part of the voting group because you've compared every vendor and every presentation. And then your wider audience of people that you want to feel consulted and you want to feel that they're involved, and they can drop in and out of different meetings. They might not see this vendor at all, but they spent all of the time with that vendor. You're still interested in their feedback, and of course, you want you want them to feel consulted. So separating your stakeholders into those two groups, we find to be a vital part of maintaining momentum while still having people feel that they're consulted on the project. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got a whole methodology around vendor selections and making sure it goes well that has 5 different phases to it, essentially. We've got the research phase, which is where you're going out to the market and you're choosing suitable suppliers for you. The initial evaluation phase, where you're evaluating the RFP responses and other criteria for each potential supplier. You've got a deep dive phase, which is where you're taking the suppliers who survived that process and you've decided to really have a good look at them. And you're spending multiple meetings with them potentially and an awful lot of time with your colleagues. And then, of course, you have to make decisions on that. That's where you're evaluating everything that you've come up with, from supplier feedback to cost to referenceability to likability and cultural fit, and you're making a decision through that. And then, of course, you've got the appointment phase, where you're nailing down exactly who said what, cut through the sales waffle. Let's get it all written down and into a contract. So just moving through those phases really briefly. I'm going to just cover the basics because we're sending all of this to you. But part of this phase is obviously to filter down, and it should be based on track record and people who've already done projects like yours. So you're getting down to a list of 4 or 6 perhaps that you're going to take a really good look at, because most organizations, that's all you can afford in terms of your energy and time from your stakeholders. The initial evaluation is where you're typically having a meeting with the supplier, checking out their track record, asking them about how they approach projects, why they're the best project for you. It's their opportunity to ask questions of you. It is time consuming, and that's why you've got to control the list size. But this is a vital part of you deciding who it is you're going to consider working with. As we put here, some suppliers you might choose to drop out at this point. Their costs don't fit. They don't do everything you're looking for. They have a different view of how projects should be implemented. All of those things are vital to flush out at this phase. The deep dive is when you're really planning to spend multiple meetings and potential days collectively from your team looking at one supplier, and then looking at another supplier and another supplier. So that should be a tight list that you're really getting into the weeds with, including things like taking up references and so on. And then, of course, the decision phase is where you're evaluating all of those criteria and trying to compare apples with apples, trying to make sure they're all comparable and people can make a decision on it. By the way, one of the great Q&A questions, please carry on adding your Q&A questions, was about when to take references. Our view is that you don't just take references once you've picked your preferred supplier. This is a really common mistake people make. They pick their preferred supplier, say no thanks to the other guys, and then they go around taking up references and checking the contracts and so on. And then, of course, they find some horrible revelations come out of that. Our view is that you should be taking up references as part of your decision making. The references should form part of whether you're including or excluding this provider from the next phase. Just like looking at the contracts should be part of deciding whether you're including them or excluding them. If the contract looks unfair, let's find that out before you choose your preferred supplier. So it does mean doubling up. It does mean your deep dive and your decision-making phases are more intensive and across more suppliers. That's why you keep that list tight. But it does mean that you're going to find those things out before you make your decision instead of afterwards, which of course makes sense. Okay, and then your appointment phase. It takes surprisingly long time. Once you pick your supplier, it can often take a month, even 2 months, to agree all the final terms and who's going to do what, get it all written into a contract and signed off, and then of course the supplier will have a lead time. So it's worth allowing proper time and respect for your appointment phase as you go. It's going to, the real work starts here essentially. Okay, let's do another scenario, and we can then see what happens and what we might do in this scenario. So what we have very commonly is that different stakeholders want to choose a different supplier as part of your vendor selection process. So what actions, and this happens, kind of multiple times, maybe 5 times out of 6, you'll have arguments about it. So what kind of steps can you take to agree the preferred supplier? So I've put here a list of things which are multiple choice. So please pick the ones that would be helpful to agree the preferred supplier. What kind of things could you do? And there are multiples of them. So pick the ones you think, and then pick the ones that you think might not be helpful. Great. I'll give that a few more seconds only. Fantastic. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So what we've got there is that essentially pretty much everyone has agreed that helpful things to do are arrange a workshop to methodically go over all of the material, keep people talking, keep people going through the content and the decision-making content. Another meeting will often help. Sometimes having another meeting with the project sponsor or the leadership team involved in the meeting can get the best out of people. Explaining to people that if we can't have an agreement, then we're going to have to make a decision based on the scoring. We're going to have to make a decision based on the budget or based on the numerical elements of the evaluation. That can help focus people's minds. What we would tend not to do is ask the project sponsor to choose the preferred supplier, because we want people to feel ownership. We want people to feel consulted and not to have it through executive decision. So great, everyone's got that right pretty much. So that's a really good outcome. Okay, so moving on from there, what we'll then do is we just want to allow some time for the Q&A. So summarizing with that, investing the right amount of time, recognizing that a vendor selection process will consume days and days and days from your team collectively, and set expectations accordingly. Make sure people are aware of that. So then evaluate, don't just evaluate based on budgets, because you'll end up spending a lot more later if you make the wrong decision. Evaluate based on track record. That's the most consistent indicator of success with your preferred supplier. That they've done it before, they can provide added value, they can guide you, they can say, oh, don't do that, let's do that. Or we've tried it these 3 different ways and this one was the best. It's that track record that really will make the difference. And then, of course, using this process not just as a kind of grim thing that you have to do. Oh, I've got to go eat the salad before I can get into my main course. This should be an enjoyable part of your project, and using it to educate and get people on board will then set you up for success later. People will understand what they're getting into. They'll understand the benefits of the project because they've seen things that will help them in their working lives. They've seen things that will help them engage with members and supporters better. So use the process and draw out the benefits from it as you go. Great. Just again, your checklist of things that you should be looking at in order to make sure this process goes well. So schedule for your voting groups and your feedback groups to be created. That means you're saying to your voting groups, right, we've got 4 suppliers, 3 meetings with each supplier. That's 12 meetings plus internal meetings to break out the ITTs and so on. Is that all booked? Are you able to commit to that? Because if you're not able to commit, you'll have to leave the voting group, and we'll get your feedback when you can for the things that you can. Your initial evaluation phase carried out, so that you've looked at your suppliers, and you've decided who's in and who's out. Your deep dives, where you've got your smaller list and you're spending endless time with them, is complete. And your decision-making phase, so that you're getting unanimity, and you've documented why this decision was made. And then, of course, giving proper time to the appointment phase, so that your final terms and contracts aren't a surprise later as you work through. Fantastic. So that's great. Let's move on from there really quickly. Matt, we've had some fantastic questions on the Q&A. Do you mind if I just get your view on it? So first of all, just on a couple of the questions, just to rattle through it quickly. We've had people ask, do we have a requirements gathering template that is good to use? And actually, that's one of the things we're sending out after this training session. So we're sending out the Get Savvy requirements gathering document that is provided as part of the main course. So that's a freebie that we're sending. Matt, I've got a question you'll be very familiar with. You've done a lot of projects with public bodies, and this poor person has to go to tender as a public body according to their, it can even be European journal rules. So they have to tell the whole world that this tender is running, and anyone can bid. So and they're not allowed to start with a kind of contained list. What is your advice to your clients, and when you're working in that environment?
I will need to be rigid here. No one can play with the rules, and there is flexibility within that. But public procurement has very clear guidelines, and I think just educating yourself. You may not have a procurement lead. If you do, great, they will help you. But certainly getting to know what you must comply with, and what your suppliers must comply with. And also, I would go with it. I know it's a bit more heavyweight, but it offers a framework and structure that both you and who you're selecting can follow. And hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you. And then, of course, some of the earlier points that you made about, if you do have to include a very wide list at the beginning, have a process where it's easy for you to decide who's in and who's out, based on asking them how many projects like ours have you done before, based on making it really clear where the budgets lie, and so on. Then another question that we've got. Uh, what's your advice, or what are your thoughts on where an organization is working across in silos? They're not talking to each other, and now you're bringing this project in, and you want a kind of a unified view of what's required from your new supplier, and yet people don't really agree on things in the day-to-day. So it's your project that's bringing that about. What have you found to be helpful in terms of tackling that kind of issue?
Yeah, so if the essential issue is working in silos and not collaborating, my greatest tip would be to engage the leadership on what you want to do as a project manager or as a team, and use the project to engage people in collaboration more. And what I found is the process of actually running requirements across teams, having cross-team meetings on supplier selection, that really breaks down some of the silo behavior, and actually just wakes people up to the fact that I can engage with someone from that team over there. We can discuss what's similar and what's different about how we work and what we need out of this system.
Absolutely. And then an additional point I'd make on that is that it is really common that these kind of projects are in fact used as the wedge, as a thin end of the wedge, to bring about this kind of organizational change. So people think of it as a technology project. We're going to introduce a new membership CRM, or a new supporter management fundraising system, whatever it is. And actually, all of this organizational change comes along with it and must be delivered as part of it. The main thing I suggest on that is making sure that your senior management team understand that. That we're going to be getting a lot of beneficial change. Breaking down silos is great, but it means that's an encumbrance on the project, and I'm going to need your support to help push that through and get people to understand that. And when people don't break down the silos or refuse to engage or refuse to think of it more widely as an organization, then your senior management team support is really your only way of resolving that. So recognize that organizational change is often comes with the project, and is extra work for you, and it needs extra support from you in order to get that in order to get that across. So Matt, we've also got a challenge where people are saying when you ask people what their requirements are, they just say, "Well, I don't really know." You know, I come in on a Monday morning and I press that button with "Press me on a Monday" written on it. How do you engage with people to get the best out of them in terms of requirements gathering and getting them to be clear on what's required from the new system?
Yeah, and I think I use two simple sentences, either in a more waterfall based project, the ability to do X. Essentially, people should be able to answer those questions. Inside membership, I need the ability to do and facilitate that conversation with them. Or in the agile world, as this type of user, in order to achieve this outcome every day, I need this. I think that really helps. And it's always going
Yeah,
to be facilitation and eking out what they think. And the only other thing I would suggest is I'm actually happy with requirements that does have the current system available to look at, and just so long as people know ultimately we're going to be leaving it behind, or it might look very different in the new system.
absolutely. And just one more I'll tackle, and then move on. Someone's asked the question, is it worth writing an RFP for off-the-shelf products? Um, and should it only be used for bespoke projects? The answer I would give is categorically write your RFP for off-the-shelf product. Things like, for instance, Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce or lots of other similar kinds of things. They are technically off the shelf, but there's vast amounts of configuration that will be required. And technology partners either are very familiar with doing that kind of thing for your business or they're not. So actually the main task on most projects these days is fitting ready-made software to your business. And there are different areas of expertise and specialism around that and costs attached to being able to do that. So it must be outlined in an RFP, I would suggest. Great, great. Thank you. We haven't got time for any more of that. So I'm just going to wrap up. So the next session that we have next week is on October 17th, change management and benefits management. This is everything you need to do to make sure your implementation project goes well, people are on board, and that you're going to get the benefits out of your project. So we'll look forward to seeing you on that. Then, of course, I'm just going to thank everyone for attending. And thank Matt so much for your advice and your insight into it as well. And then to say that we'll be providing the session to you. So that will come very shortly. Please do take advantage of your 50% discount to make sure that you're supported on your next project. You have everything that you need. We'll be providing some templates and useful documents to everybody as your reward for attending today, including a requirements document template, top tips for getting the best out of requirements gathering sessions, and then a supplier reference checklist that you can use when you're evaluating your different suppliers. We will also send you some Dear Savvy articles. That's the Dear Savvy community where people who are involved in projects write in with problems and vent and get help from each other and from us. It's a lot of fun. And then, of course, we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Matt, thank you so much for your help today. I really, really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's joined us.
Great. I hope it was useful, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.